Now, for more on the AIIB and its growing influence, I'm joined in studio by Scott Morris. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development and director of the U.S. Development Policy Initiative. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
So let's start with this meeting being held in Luxembourg. What message do you think the AIIB is trying to convey by holding this as their first meeting outside of Asia?
Well, I do think it's an important set of meetings, and particularly because it's out of the region. In many respects, I think the bank is still in a honeymoon period. It's still young. On the other hand, it has a very large membership. It's important for the bank to demonstrate at a high level that they have the commitment and support of their membership for their agenda, particularly for the non-regional members who aren't as close to home for the institution. So I really do think it's an important step forward for the institution.
And as we speak of the members, there are already 71 member countries and 26 prospective members. So what are the benefits of membership, especially if you're a non-Asian economy?
Well, I think first and foremost for these countries, they have prioritized investing in infrastructure in other countries and using the institution to do that. So I think at a time when other multilateral development banks, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, perhaps aren't as growing as fast as countries may want, it was very useful to have the creation of this institution to allow them an opportunity to put more of their own financing into these projects.
And we know that the theme of this year was cooperation and connectivity. So talk about some of the latest projects and what's really on the agenda in terms of goals this year.
Well, I think infrastructure is still the priority broadly defined, but within that, I think we are seeing some innovation. Certainly prioritization of green, which has been there from the beginning, but actually seeing that operationalized is critical. Infrastructure is not just a development challenge, increasingly it's a climate challenge. So I think the ability of the bank to really prioritize that and deliver projects is going to be an important innovation. And then you have things like use of local currency finance, which has been a challenging instrument for these institutions. It's important for the countries that are borrowing because currency risk is always a significant one. For institutions like the AIIB to find a way to take on more of that risk themselves is going to be really critical. And particularly for a young institution to prioritize such an innovative approach, I think is striking.
And you also have to consider the priorities for the countries themselves. I mean, the AIIB president, he said that many lower and lower middle income members need to boost infrastructure investment by a third to drive Asian growth and the green economy. But what are your thoughts on how they are going to prioritize that over, say, other more, as they see more pressing issues in their economies?
Well, infrastructure is fundamental, and I think if you ask any country finance minister, planning minister, they will say that. So in a sense, it's not hard for them to state it as a priority. I think the fundamental challenge with infrastructure investment, frankly, over other areas is that it costs a lot. So, we are in a period when countries are facing debt sustainability challenges, and it's really critical for institutions like the AIIB to find a way to work with these countries in a way that's sustainable in terms of their debt load, but is still delivering the infrastructure that ultimately is going to help these economies grow.
Because some people have had some questions about, obviously the AIIB with $8.5 billion worth of investment, how is it managing some of these debt concerns that some of these countries have if they want them to really spend more on infrastructure and take on more debt?
Well, I think the bank is doing it exactly as we would want, which is in coordination with other multilateral institutions, other bilateral lenders, and with the borrowers themselves, so that we have careful assessment of the debt risk for these countries, what their overall debt load looks like, and that investments proceed in a way that's sensitive to that. So I think it's important to have the AIIB in concert with the other multilateral institutions really leading these kinds of investments and really demonstrating the right approach for other types of lenders who may not be as sensitive to debt risk.
Because we did see that when the AIIB first came about, there was a lot of concern about, is it going to be competing with some of these other financial institutions? Why do you think these sorts of funds, specifically this one, is really still necessary?
Well, I think competition was always the wrong way to think about it. These actually are very complementary institutions. They're cooperative institutions. As we've heard, the infrastructure gap is huge. So there is a capital need there. But frankly, the more difficult challenge, and the reason it's useful to have more multilateral institutions, is it can be really hard to develop these projects and to find the projects, to bring them along and all the way to fruition. And an institution like the World Bank need not have a monopoly on those kinds of efforts. They are challenging, and the more actors innovating around these challenges, I think the better.
And as there is more sort of interconnectivity and influence with these different lending institutions, what's your outlook for how you see the AIIB progressing?
Well, I remain positive because I think it has progressed very carefully to date, which I think is important. It's done so in a way that's generated a lot of confidence in the financial community, evidenced in the bank's credit rating, its bond issuance. Those are all very important steps, and it really required the bank to move carefully and frankly somewhat slowly. But I think that speaks well for its future. I think in the next 5 years we will see a significantly larger institution, and one that I hope continues to innovate.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. Scott Morris there, Senior Fellow at the Center for Global Development and Director of the U.S. Development Policy Initiative.